Well, it really started with allowing myself to feel the emotions that I apparently had suppressed many, many years ago. And doing that heart rhythm meditation, I once discovered this feeling of loneliness, despair, abandonment. And I was shocked, but it was inside of me. And I thought I was well balanced, going about my life, didn't have any really deep kind of emotions holding me back. But I discovered that I did. And it was really that discovery. I liken it to what they call the dark night of the soul, kind of where you discover something about yourself and you realize that's not who I want to be or who I thought I was. It's sort of a dissolving of the ego self and coming into this other aspect of yourself that honestly I didn't know existed until I went through that process.
Welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I'm your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master Sun Qing, and we have the incredible opportunity and delight of having Karen and Eben here today, and they're sort of a duo that sort of merged many things that I'm very fond of in relation to the basic understanding of physiology merged with spirituality, creating some type of like conscious expression of the universe. So welcome, guys, to the podcast.
Well, Sam, thanks so much for having us on. It's great to be with you today.
Yes, I'm so happy to be having this conversation with someone who understands both sides of this issue.
And yeah, it really is sort of like an interesting overview. A lot of people sort of tend to jump on one side of the fence, like there is one perception-wise. But I would love you to share a little bit more about your backstory and how the two of you are here together today.
You should probably start.
Yeah, I'll just start with my own experience, which was a near-death experience reported in the book Proof of Heaven. So I don't need to go into any real detail about it, but I formerly had been a neurosurgeon, taught neurosurgery 15 years plus at Harvard Medical School, thought I understood brain-mind consciousness to some level. And then this near-death experience where all the ingredients were there to really disassemble my brain and its ability to have any kind of dream or hallucination. But in that setting, I had this most profound experience that completely defied my prior reductive materialist neuroscientific worldview and demanded a much grander explanation of the phenomenon of consciousness. And that's what Karen and I have worked on the last 15 years. So
when we first met, though, I knew Eben had had a near-death experience. We were both attending a workshop using sound to get into expanded states. So this was 3 years after his near-death experience during a 7-day coma. And I met but before his book came out, before everyone knew about his story. And so I had known other people who'd had near-death experiences. And so I didn't want to know what happened. I just wanted to know, what did you learn? That was what was important to me, the transformative effects of these kind of experiences. So I said, what was your biggest lesson? And he says, the brain doesn't create consciousness. Yeah, you're laughing. I was confused.
It's so exciting hearing you guys say this.
You know? Yeah, and I said, why would anyone think that it does? And that showed where I was. I didn't understand that was kind of the fulcrum point of materialist science, that the brain creates consciousness. So for Eben to make this discovery firsthand was hugely important to him. But I said, well, what about the love that people talk about over there? And he says, oh, that's really powerful. You can't bring that love back here. And I said, oh, I'm not so sure about that, Dr. Alexander. And I said, because I've experienced that love through meditation, through other types of kind of techniques for expansion. I knew other people who had had those kind of love connections. And so that's what made us kind of very curious about each other. And that was kind of the foundation of how we kind of moved forward.
Wow, that's such an amazing story, because I mean, there's this wonderment in realizing consciousness through all different sort of lenses, and most people will come across it perhaps a fleeting moment listening to our conversation. Oh, that sounds like an interesting concept, or perhaps they go as deep as, you know, the near-death experience or the loss of someone that they love dearly, that gives them a sense that there's something more there, and sort of understanding that, you know, the tuning fork being the physical body, the register of this experience that you're having. And so many people are like, well, you know, I mean, we can define consciousness, or can we? And, you know, I personally, from my own experience within this space, it's still up for more than a healthy conversation, even when, you know, as recently in the last 50 years that Bruce Lee would always talk about the flow and consciousness in of itself, or moreover, the offering of the Beatles through a historical sort of realization that, you know, integrating the East with the West and getting a sense of what is this mystery that goes beyond things, the idea that meditation can take you somewhere other than where you're sitting right now. And so when I hear you guys that are really forming this incredible understanding and awakening people to their own power through this knowledge, it excites me, because this is really what we're about. I'm personally, that's my mission, to raise people's consciousness. So how did you look at the sound aspect? Because fundamentally, from a neurological aspect, it's very much the gateway to changing.
I would simply say that, you know, after my experience, especially in the months after, as I was going to my doctors, talking it over with them, going through the neurologic exams, the scans, the lab values, the case was not lining up at all. I mean, that brain that I was examining was far too ill to have any dream or hallucination. And yet I knew that during that time period, when my brain was demonstrably offline, I'd had the most profound, memorable, detailed, transformational set of events of my entire existence occur. So I had to make sense of it somehow. And that's where in those first 2 years, I read about 150 books, quantum physics, spiritual traditions, East and West, trying to make sense of it all. And yet what I was realizing was that consciousness was not created by the brain at all. And the brain serves as a filter or transceiver, but is not the ultimate producer. And that's why it's more of a prison than anything. So when we die, our conscious awareness actually is transformed, liberated to a higher level.
And didn't you have a lot of sound during that experience?
Well, sound was absolutely at the key of it all, because the sound was the way I had seen my ability to traverse various spiritual realms. I remember light portals that had music associated with them. So music was in frequency, vibration, was an incredibly rich part of my journey. But after having read all those books, I came to the obvious conclusion that if I really wanted to understand consciousness, I had to explore my own consciousness, not just read books about the topic. And I knew I had recently learned of a technique called binaural beat brainwave entrainment. First of all, I presented my story at the University of Virginia, and I was met by 2 people from the Monroe Institute who came for that very reason. But I knew that meditation was crucial, and I investigated enough to recognize binaural beats were created by a circuit in the lower brainstem. There's a general principle in evolutionary biology that if you want to get at the depths of a function like consciousness, you explore the anatomy associated, like the brain, and its progression over history of evolution. And in that sense, you know, most sounds you've ever heard that might have engendered a transcendental state of conscious awareness were processed up in the acoustic cortex of the temporal lobes, circuits that have developed in humans and primates in the last 1 or 2 million years. Very different are the sounds of sacred acoustics and similar binaural beat brainwave entrainment. They're processed by a circuit that arose more than 300 million years ago, way down in the lower brainstem. And I think that's one of the reasons, by modulating that circuit, causing these oscillations with the sound of sacred acoustics, I believe that is one of the reasons we're kind of able to shake consciousness free from the tree of the brain and the physical body and the physical world and the sense of here, now, and self, into a much grander, more universal primordial mind. And this is all what we discussed in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, that Karen and I wrote together and published in 2017. So Living in a Mindful Universe is really a direct expression of this proof of heaven, because that's really where this particular book goes. And I would say the book Proof of Heaven was more of a question mark. Even though it's out in its 10th anniversary edition now, Living in a Mindful Universe is a really go-to resource for learning more. That 10th anniversary edition of Proof of Heaven does have 36 additional pages. So it does go a lot further than the first book did. But Living in a Mindful Universe that Karen and I wrote together is really kind of the information leading to the opening of the passageway to a much higher level.
It's really profound. I mean, you've witnessed this on your journey. If you had to give the audience a timeline, how long have you guys consciously been aware of this different reality?
Well, I would say it was thrust on me in my NDE. So 15 plus years ago is when it was first demonstrated to me that there was a much grander universe than this, just our little physical world, and that the only way to explain conscious phenomena was to explore more deeply that richness and its expansion beyond here, now, and sense of self. And I think Karen brought a tremendous amount of wisdom to me concerning this whole question, because she had been living her whole life as an idealist, acknowledging the primacy of mind.
And what about yourself, Karen? What was the entropy threshold for you? Was it disorder that created a whole new order, or I mean, where was the threshold?
Yeah, for me, it was my pure will. I knew there was more than what normal, traditional, conventional religion and science was teaching me. I'd known my whole life that most of what we were learning wasn't really capital T truth. That's what I was interested in. And I had explored a lot of Eastern texts, other types of, more esoteric theosophy, all kinds of things. And I knew, just like Eben discovered, that generating experience was the key to really understanding how it all works, what capital T truth really is. And yet, when I would sit down, say around the year 2000, sat down to try to meditate, maybe even before that, I couldn't do it. I was a busy project manager. I would sit and watch my breath. And I thought, okay, where's that samadhi, that bliss that they talk about? And as a, kind of an impatient Westerner, I thought it would happen a lot quicker. But I really had to do a lot of practice, a lot of stop and start, a lot of trial and error to really find those techniques that worked for me. Because sometimes I would be sitting in a course and people would be explaining, oh my gosh, I saw my grandmother and this and that and the other, and my guide came, and I thought they were nuts. I didn't know what they were talking about. And I thought, I want that. And lo and behold, I got it, eventually. And what it involved was, I would say there were two keys for me. One was a particular form of heart rhythm meditation. I tried many forms of meditation, but this was the type that had you focusing on your heart and generating feelings of gratitude, things like that. And that was very challenging for me. I could think of things up here I was grateful for, but actually feeling them in the way that was described was more challenging. So that heart rhythm meditation allowed me to kind of discover suppressed emotions that I didn't even know that I had. And when all of that came out, that was really a necessary part for me to get to that essence that Eben's talking about, that higher consciousness, that soul perspective, whatever word you want to use. But sound was another key, because I could not quiet those racing thoughts. And I thought for a while they had to disappear completely in order to be successful. So in my book, I was not being very successful because those thoughts were not ending. I eventually learned, no, you just change your focus. You don't focus on those thoughts. They can still kind of be taking place, but you're paying no attention to them. That was a big eye-opener. But sound really helped to quiet the mind, really helped me get past that kind of, oh, I can't do this, into, oh, I can do this. And it's actually very natural. The particular binaural beats that help the brain get into those quieter states of awareness, those were like training wheels for me, because I can get into those states now. I can recognize those states and get into them without necessarily using the sound. But sound was incredibly key in getting me to that point where I felt like I could reach beyond the here and now, say through out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, telepathic connections, all kinds of things that I validated for myself, which is what I kept reading about, that everyone has this capacity. And I learned that, in fact, I did. And so by the time I met Eben, I already understood all of this. And that's why I was kind of confused that someone who had just had this amazing spiritual experience would still be kind of stuck on kind of the, you know, oh my gosh, the brain doesn't create consciousness. However, I realized very quickly how important it is for doctors, for materialist scientists to have this realization, because in order for the secular society to move forward, Western society, we need to integrate some of these understandings, some of these truths into our understanding about how the world works. And so that's when I realized, oh my gosh, this is critical for other people to understand. Even though I've been living that way, many, many people need to have that scientific support in order to make that move forward.
Yeah, I mean, the entry level is kind of critical to validating the experience for yourself. I always tell people, if you're thinking, you're not knowing. If you're knowing, you're feeling. And it seems to be a consensus, whether I'm speaking to a neuroscientist, a physicist, a guru, a sound healer, a psychic, a medium. There is that validation that comes from this physical flesh and blood that we perceive as just our humanness, as opposed to it really is a tuning fork that is still registering this so-called data, however you want to perceive it, that creates this experience that you're able to realize you're out of your body, or you're in your body, or you're, you know, as I would put it, you're going inside. If I teach someone, you know, astral projection or things of that nature, it's under the blanket of what I consider sensory perception. And so that's sort of like getting a greater, a palpable example that you are then able to sort of like create that gateway. And I mean, I think you briefly notion the entrainment that sort of comes from the neurology, that you can, you know, use that as from a training level, replicate the experience, and then that in tune creates a gateway into something that's greater that you can then repeat. And that's what's sort of very focused on within the ancient practices I teach within Taoism. The internal alchemy is really important because it gives you a repeatable experience where you can enter this state and maintain it. And, you know, there goes the whole premise of theory in of itself, right down to, you know, everyone debating what is time and space time per se right now, as a quantum physicist revealing, you know, the united sort of field of awareness, 0 point energy, where that slip between time and space and black hole and all that kind of good, that veil that's right there, that separator. But I mean, the reality is we've identified this through our ancient practices, just the 0 point. And so that comes from the internal alchemy. And people are like, well, we've never had the language of science before to describe what people are doing. But intuitively, we've known throughout the, you know, history of humanity that these are coming in all different forms, whether it's a spiritual, atheist, religious sort of cycle that we all go through to realize, well, what does this really mean to us? Well, for me, it always comes down to show me. It's like a validation, and then it becomes real, and that's really critical to the experience of the individual. I always remind people, my audience, students, teachers, whoever I'm working with, remember that it's only valid when you say it is. And this sort of gets people a little up in arms when I say, hey, the truth is only what you believe. And people are like, whoa, hang on a second. That sounds, and then you watch the authoritarian raise up and they're like, hang on a second. You can't refute that. That's a scientific fact. But again, the scientific fact is still a theory. That's why they call it that. And so hang on, whoa. It's as far as we've come within the evolution of, you know, physics per se, that this is the outcome. This is the determined sort of outcome. But still, there's this thread, that 0 point. I bring us back to that because we've used it within ancient Taoist practices for thousands of years, and you teach it within a cultivating practice that we call the middle dantian, which means energy field. And so when you evoke the access of the 81 chambers within the middle dantian, it's the witness of a death of a star, the raising of the red phoenix from the ash, evoking black hole energy. And so for many years, my students have been like, oh, wow, this makes sense. It works. I apply it. I manifest, heal, create all these different things. And then one of my students came to me, and he has a PhD doing research for a university. And he's like, I just discovered the what's in the nucleus of a human cell. I'm like, please do tell me. Black hole energy. Oh my goodness, I'm blown. And so, you know, we've got this merging of the two. And I think your coupling, just like you are this perfect like offering of a salmonier, the surging of these two energies and the interweaving of those, coming to this sort of definition of consciousness is so beautiful to see. And you guys just link together so well. I just love experiencing the transmission that you put out, and your auric field is blowing my eyebrows. They're a little burnt right now, but we're hanging in there. So how would you, learning these processes, being so deep into it, what is a sort of pathway that you would take someone on to come to this realization?
I would say my first step was certainly a recognition that that little voice in my head, you know, Eben Alexander's kind of mental processes, was my consciousness. And after my coma, I realized, no, that's not true at all. My awareness, that's my higher soul, my awareness. I wish Rene Descartes started this whole thing off in the 1700s. He said, I think, therefore I am. I wish he'd said, I am aware of my thoughts, therefore I am. Because it's not really the thoughts that prove your existence and your soulhood. It's your awareness of them. And that's the part of you that expands tremendously at the time of bodily death, beyond, you know, anything I would have ever imagined before, is that awareness, that kind of higher soul. And that's what I've been doing for the last really 11 or 12 years now, using sacred acoustics on a daily basis for an hour or two of meditation.
Amazing.
For me, it's been incredibly beautiful how it's opened me up. And so in my meditations, Eben Alexander's little ego voice can make a statement or a request, but then it goes into timeout. And I've learned to just ride the tones, just flow with the sacred acoustics tones. I love how in his book, The Untethered Soul, Michael Singer calls that voice in your head the annoying roommate. That's a beautiful way of putting it. And that's why it's important for us to understand that that little ego voice is not your ally in these spiritual journeys, and really needs to go into timeout. It'll beat you up over how come you're doing this wrong, you're not getting anywhere, forget about this. That's what the little voice in the head will try and convince you of, just like Karen's did and mine had with any similar attempts previously. But the binaural beats give this lower brainstem oscillation that sooner or later, when you learn to surrender to it, can be an incredible teacher by opening you up to your higher soul and primordial mind that is completely beyond any notion of here, now, and sense of self. And that's what is so important about that state of awareness, the hypnagogic space, which is kind of between awake and asleep, something most of us are kind of used to. But when you use something like sacred acoustics, you learn how to basically manage that expanded sense of conscious awareness. And that personal experience, as you were saying earlier, that ignites a real fire within a soul of showing the possibility of where this can all go. And you also come to realize that beliefs in our society are by and large falsely limiting compared to our true potential. So when we believe these things are possible, we're allowing ourselves to get closer to truth. You know, it's not being led to falsehood. I love how Soren Kierkegaard said there are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what is not true. The other is to refuse to believe what is true. And I think we've had more than a century where, you know, the conventional materialist scientists would say, oh, near-death experiences are nonsense. They're hallucinations of the dying brain. That's what I would have told you before my coma. But after I went through it, I realized, whoa, there is so much more going on here. So it's been a real beautiful awakening. But that's been the key, is recognizing that little ego voice in the head as not my higher soul and who I truly am.
And I would just add more on this idea of the inner observer. So I alluded to it earlier when I realized that my thoughts could still exist as long as I wasn't paying attention to them. Learning how to not pay attention to your thoughts is really foundational for all of this. They can just be happening and you notice them. They're not who you are. And so where this comes in really handy is not just during a meditative state. That's where you practice having this inner observer kind of noticing what's going on. But then what happens once you've practiced this enough, you can be out in the world interacting with people, and you might find yourself in an argument or maybe a heated discussion about something. And then lo and behold, I've had this happen where that observer will kick in right there, right in the middle of that, and sort of feed me advice. Oh, you're behaving this way. Maybe you should try this angle. Or you realize this, whole downloads of, oh, the other person's perspective might be this. Maybe you could try this approach. I start to get fed advice in the moment of how I might be able to modify my actions, my behaviors, to change the outcome, not just later when I'm looking back and maybe not so proud of my behavior, but in the moment. That inner observer kicks in, and it can really be quite helpful. You can call on that observer if, say, you're in a busy meeting or you're in some kind of situation and you're trying to make a decision. I love how you call the body a tuning fork, because you can actually, program your body to give you a yes/no answer on a particular question that doesn't come from here, but comes from your energy instead. And so there's lots of ways this inner observer can be used practically in your daily life. And it's not just, oh, you need to go into a cave and, meditate like Eben says he does for all this time during the day. It's how then does that practice help you to navigate your daily life? And so I just wanted to point that out.
Oh, no, I think you've made some incredible points. The thing that I think the audience would be curious to understand, because any OGs of the channel or people, students, anyone that is aware of my understanding of this very topic, is your emotions don't control you, you control your emotions. And people are like, whoa, that sounds very testosterone driven. Not really. When you start to become one with all things, you can get your emotions to sit over in the corner, play dead, roll over. And as Karen was saying, the observer, and then you can really start to get down with some incredible transformational experiences that can affect you physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And that's that pulpability, that energetic charge, and that reference point. So I'm more curious to ask you, how did you go from the ego noise that would constantly deconstruct your very action, because that's generally a representation of that in the negative sort of feedback that you get inside your head, as opposed to now the observer and how you're getting actual high conscious information that can be very relevant and pertinent to the event at that moment. How did you distinguish the two?
Well, it really started with allowing myself to feel the emotions that I apparently had suppressed many, many years ago. And doing that heart rhythm meditation, I once discovered this feeling of loneliness, despair, abandonment. And I was shocked, but it was inside of me. And I thought I was well balanced, going about my life, didn't have any really deep kind of emotions holding me back. But I discovered that I did. And it was really that discovery. I liken it to what they call the dark night of the soul, kind of where you discover something about yourself and you realize that's not who I want to be or who I thought I was. It's sort of a dissolving of the ego self and coming into this other aspect of yourself that honestly I didn't know existed until I went through that process. I couldn't access it. And so really allowing that to be released was a process that was not very comfortable. In my case, it involved a lot of crying. Some people spend a lot of time resisting crying. And of course, we're often told, don't cry, you know, especially when we're children, we're told to stop crying. And I was one of those kids who thought crying wasn't necessarily good for you, but it turned out to be an incredibly helpful tool. And what I learned after releasing all of that kind of loneliness and despair, it's kind of like peeling back layers of an onion. It doesn't happen all at once. So that was one of the biggest instances. But another meditation later in that same sort of meditation retreat, I was then joined by what I called a team, an energetic team that honestly, I realized I could never be alone, because that team was available, this energy source that just felt like it was supporting me no matter what. I discovered that. I would not have discovered that if not going through that uncomfortable emotion. But then what I realized, and I had learned this verbally from teachers, read about it in books, but then I started to notice it myself. Anytime I had an emotional response to something, that was my clue to then look within and say, what is causing that triggered emotion? What about me is feeling emotional about this? Someone else isn't emotional about it, but I am. And so I learned that emotions were actually clues to what was going on inside of me. And I love your comment about learning to manage our emotions, because that's exactly what I learned to do, how to manage my emotions and how to manage my thoughts. And when the thoughts include those limiting beliefs that Eben was talking about. I alluded to one earlier when I told myself, oh, I can't do this. I can't meditate. I'm one of those people. I hear people say that now, and I just chuckle inside because I said the same thing. And another key was changing that inner talk. So every time I, heard myself inside saying, I can't do this, I consciously changed that thought to, I can do this. And slowly but surely, this is how you learn to manage your thoughts and your emotions. Observing your emotions is much better than being taken away by them. And I've had both things happen. And when you can observe them, Eben was a witness to this once. It was during the initial part of the COVID pandemic when many of us were, facing our emotional issues. And I was going through something and really feeling these emotions. And part of it was just letting myself, kind of to feel it. And Eben was watching me, feeling rather disturbed by the whole thing and wanting to help do something. And I remember saying to him, don't worry, it's almost done. I've reached the fulcrum point, the halfway. I'm going to get there. Just bear with me. Part of me knew that was the observer. The other part of me was experiencing the emotion. So, wow, it really does help to have that understanding when you're going through difficult times.
Well, I imagine having the support of each other with a far deeper understanding, because most people immerse themselves in the tornado, the tsunami, and everything's rationalized down to that moment. Now, that's a very profound observation, to be in the present moment, but not if you identify as your personality. So it's like, okay, we're in the present moment of these emotions that are swirling through the very fabric of how I'm perceiving things. But I always remind people that entry level, the lower frequency stuff can be identified in a representation of a negative processes, a negative viewpoint. And the simplicity of the glass is half empty, glass half full still leaves you in the fundamentals of duality. But, from a Taoist perspective, the journey is to take yin and yang, two sides of a mountain. As you merge the two together, you realize everything as one. And that's that fundamental ability to shift and affect change. When I say change, an expansion of consciousness within this 3D reality. And that may come in the form of a manifestation, magic, healing. And I say magic, I say real magic that's an infrastructure of a more detailed manifestation. And so when you put your intention to anything, you can fundamentally, from the words of Tom Campbell, change the probability of the outcome. And so that will be representative in what is going on in your reality. How have you shifted it? I mean, just saying and mentioning those things is going to really warm up the audience, because these are fundamental things that are very important for me to give people a base level of understanding when they go on their journey of exploration. The first thing you do is acquire that mastery. And so here we go to a little bit more on the neuroscience side, because you're using sound, and I generally use a visual audible experience, creating that kinesthetic charge that validates it to you. And then we have this sort of mystical illusion that, you know, the whole body cannot be maestroed by the vagus nerve, however you want to pronounce it. And the idea that a standard neurologist would say that the spleen is not innervated that way, that it can possibly have a register from that experience, which I think all three of us can agree that that's fundamentally false. Once you acquire this energetic architecture, that you can absolutely maestro every cell in your body. What are your thoughts on that, Eben?
Well, I think that's exactly what happens, for example, in healing. You know, medical science has used placebo effect for the last 70 or so years, much longer than that informally, but kind of defined placebo effect, especially with the modern scientific study of randomized controlled, placebo-controlled trial. And it's acknowledgement when you step back and really look at placebo for what it is. It's an example of mind over matter, of our ability to heal ourselves. And you can move beyond simple placebo effect. For example, spontaneous remission. If you go to Institute of Noetic Sciences website, noetics.org, put in the term spontaneous remission, you'll find a book they published in the mid-90s, 3,500 plus cases of curing of cancer, advanced infections, etc., all due to non-medical intervention factors. People, you know, focusing on their health and prayer and things like that, different kind of spiritual approaches that help them to achieve healing. And then, of course, the really big elephant in the room are the spontaneous healing from advanced diseases. Like in my case, there was a medical case report written on my medical records. It came out September 2018, Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, written by 3 doctors not involved in my care, but fascinated by my recovery. And they make it very clear in that report that my brain was in no shape to do any kind of dream or hallucination, much less this most profound experience of my entire life. And not only that, how do you explain the recovery? In fact, the peer review editors of that journal challenged the authors. They said, how do you explain his complete recovery within 2 months after waking up from coma, from, you know, weakened coma due to a severe gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis? And the authors said it's because he had a near-death experience. And they and the peer review editors knew of other cases like Anita Morjani, who healed her advanced lymphoma. That was way back in 2006. She's doing fine today with no evidence of cancer. Dr. Mary C. Newell, who had an over 30-minute warm water drowning, kayaking in Chile in the late 1990s, brought to the surface dead, but she made a full recovery, all in the setting of these deep spiritual journeys. And what they're really showing us is the power we have as spiritual beings. And by spiritual, I simply mean interconnected through mind, and also with a shared kind of meaning and purpose with each other and with the universe at large. All of that kind of spirituality, which again does not demand any kind of religious ideology, but personal experience, is right at the core of it in the modern era. And this is where I think we can all grow, by acknowledging the tremendous benefit that NDEs have brought to the study, scientific study of conscious awareness. And I mean, there's just a tremendous amount that has gone on in these last 15 years since my coma in terms of human and scientific understanding of the primacy of consciousness in the universe, with the brain serving as a filter that gives us this little eddy current that we identify as our own consciousness. And yet ultimately it's sourced in that primordial mind. This is all material we cover in Living in a Mindful Universe, but for the point of this discussion, it's very relevant to our unfolding understanding.
I would like to talk to Karen about the sound aspect, because that's your specialty. And, you know, sort of synergizing and synchronizing, because, you know, fundamentally indigenous practices like the ones I teach, we understand the syncing of the sun, the earth, and the moon. And these are 3 correlating energy sources that reference light, information, and energy within Taoism. But, you know, fundamentally over the last 15, 20 years since heart math has sort of raised the awareness that, you know, when you synchronize, you create this sort of coherent aspect, that there's this fundamental shift in what takes place in the physiology, the chemistry that goes on within it. Within your sound healing journey, did you notice that that was an element from a sort of an experiential, you know, realization? Was that something that you noticed before it became far more in-depth and repeatable within your journey?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of the brainwave entrainment out there has the word sync in it. So there's brain sync, hemisync, synchronicity, and holosync. There were a lot of brain maps going around back when this became popular, say in the 80s, 1980s, that the left and right brain was actually synchronizing. And that's what they would teach us was going on when you would listen to these binaural beats. And so Kevin Cossey, he's the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics, along with myself. He and I, who had met before we met Eben, about a year before, he's a mechanical and electrical engineer in New York. And he had had out-of-body experiences. He had had a short near-death experience, but nonetheless still powerful. And he wanted to use binaural beats. That's where I met him in the context of exploring this technology. He wanted to use these binaural beats to induce out-of-body experience and things like that, that Robert Monroe had originally discovered was possible. And so he purchased a brainwave reading device that we met up at a workshop, and we listened to the recordings and put these probes on our forehead. And there was a left probe, a right probe. So it was only measuring the frontal lobes. And what we discovered was that in our case, the left and right brain was not synchronizing at all. That's not at all what was happening. In fact, what was happening, which made a lot of sense, was that the left brain was getting much quieter. And we know that the left brain is the linguistic, analytical brain, and the right brain is the more expanded kind of creative expression. And so when we discovered the left brain quieting down, this made perfect sense that that's why our thoughts would quiet down. And so when we started making our own recordings, like I say, Kevin wanted to make his own, and I thought he was nuts. I thought that would, you know, we weren't musicians. We didn't know how to do all of this, but he was an engineer. You take things apart, you put them back together in innovative ways. And so he learned about my vast library of different types of sound that I had been experimenting with. And so that was my contribution to the chore of analyzing what was going on in all of this music. And what we found is that you could create binaural beats rather simply, but it was all of the other decisions that you make when you create the binaural beats that make a difference in how they sound. So lots of people, when they would combine these digital frequencies, they would sound very harsh. And so all the early binaural beat recordings included rain or white noise, pink noise, sometimes just shower sound or water, something that would kind of soften these sounds. And we found that when we combined the carrier frequencies using harmonic principles, that everything changed. We suddenly became musicians because we were not combining tones based on some chart that other binaural beat producers had pointed to, but Thomas Campbell, for one, they had the Oster curve. He was one of your previous guests you mentioned, and he was one of the engineers who helped Bob Monroe make this discovery. But at any rate, they had a specific way that they determined these should be made, and we opened that box completely, and we were able to create recordings that took us into deeper spaces that felt more holographic rather than just left ear, right ear. Because binaural beats at their most basic is when you play one tone in one ear, a slightly different tone in the other, the difference between those tones being matched to a brainwave state, say 4 hertz, which is the electric signal emitted by the brain when you're in that hypnagogic state, the state between delta and theta, awake and in a maybe meditative state is often what you're in with theta frequencies. But at any rate, we created all kinds of different formulas for different effects. And this turned into a lot of fun sessions where Eben eventually joined us about a year after we met. Eben was up in New York, or a year after Kevin and I had met. Eben was up in New York looking at publishers for his initial story. And that's when Kevin met him at a hotel, hooked him up to that same brainwave reading device. And we saw what was going on in his brain. Also, left and right brain was not synchronizing. Now, we used that same device, because that was your original question, on other people. When we did see synchronization take place was very often, that was when, it happened a few times, but it happened when mediums, people who can reach the other side to connect with departed souls who've left this physical world, their brains would often go into a synchronized state when they were making that deepest connection. And so what we eventually realized was these binaural beats provided a foundation for us to get into these quieter states, but it's really the mixture of the energy of the body, the intention of the listener, wherever that listener is spiritually, that then is what really drives your experience. So the sound is providing the support for it, but each individual will have their own experience. And that's why there's such a wide range of ways for people to respond. Very much the same as there's a very wide range of ways people describe their near-death experiences. But there's a common denominator in that we are spiritual. We are in touch more with that spiritual aspect of who we are, kind of out there in our inner world, which, as you say, kind of brings us out into the universe. That's where those unique experiences really start to play into our personal journeys, our soul purpose, and things like that. So the recordings help get us into that state so that we can do that further exploration.
I think the more important effect of the tones is not synchronizing the hemispheres as much as generating a strong left-right oscillation in the lower brainstem. I mean, there's a principle that's been for use in hypnosis for more than centuries, where you use a pendulum and have the eyes follow the pendulum. And in the current era, we also have eye movement desensitization reprocessing, EMDR, a very effective treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. And these techniques have in common that they're inducing a left-right oscillation in the brainstem. Now, for the visual stimulus and EMDR, it's happening well up in the midbrain, much more recently evolved circuits. But with sacred acoustics and other auditory forms of driving, you're going way down into the medulla, into the lower brainstem. As I said, these circuits are more than 300 million years old. And I think a strong left-right oscillation in the lower brainstem is what has the power to kind of shake our conscious awareness free from the here and now sense of self and from our normal kind of ego-based kind of conscious awareness to a grander kind of across the veil primordial mind perspective.
And before you comment, I just wanted to add that, we see this phenomenon in brass bowls, Tibetan brass bowls or crystal bowls, that gong that you have behind you. It's that oscillation between the sides of the bowls. They're actually creating natural binaural beats with lots more harmonic overtones. But it's no surprise to me that our ancient ancestors discovered that these types of sound instruments could help us get into these states. And all we're doing that's different is using, digital computer technology to do it much more precisely. But the technology exists naturally in those types of instruments.
Yeah, it's really exciting, all the things that you're touching on and sharing with the audience. Specifically, I just recently had a scientist that studies sort of psychic mediums using, EEGs. His name is Jeff Tarrant, and he was finding and noticing a very similar result that you guys were admitting to just now, that you're not going to see this firsthand. In actuality, when the psychics are performing their states, their brainwave state or reading is very average or very benign in relation to looking for an aha moment where you've got this like, angel flying out of their brain or something of that nature. The brainwave state is not happening like that on paper, yet the information source that they're pulling in and they're being able to share with their patient, whoever it is phenomenal, and it's dead accurate. So there's this sort of like gray area or this question mark that goes on when we're playing with these things. And I think universally it comes right back to that feeling. And Eben had mentioned the EMDR stuff, and that's an interesting phenomenon. Within Taoism, we have an ancient practice called the sacred infinite flower, and it's a culmination of the pituitary, pineal, and thalamus, and you use the eyes to generate the infinity, which basically magnifies this golden radiant light within inside what you consider your upper dantian, and it becomes very blinding, but it envelops all things. And quite frankly, when you envelop the brain, personally, I've measured my brainwave state with the limited capacity up to 100 hertz, and I do that during channeling, like most of my teachers or any major source information, or evident within healing, and that's like an instantaneous thing. And so I personally believe I'm probably operating between 100 and 200, but I just haven't had the technology to measure it further than that without it being, muddied data. So it's like really interesting how we can observe these things and realize how powerful that sound is. But the palpability of understanding that neurology gets that palpable, repeatable experience that's very, very important for an outcome. For me, it's just like if anyone's ever experienced spoon bending, there is this phenomenon that takes place. Well, it's not really a phenomenon in that sense. You shift a state. There's 3 stages I teach people. And first is the force one, and you visually see the metal melt, and you're forcing it, applying a little pressure physically. Then you go to holding the spoon and melting it like a piece of butter. And then the graduate stage is looking at the fork and bending the prongs any way you choose to. And that is also applied to physical healing. That's how I would perform a physical healing. And my goodness, over 30 years, I've seen thousands of them. Eben had referenced himself, his own realization coming out of a coma, and the brain being functioning 100%. I mean, this is a consensus that I had with Tom too. When you get into this healing state, he confessed to it, and I shared with him some of the examples that I witness on a daily basis. And it's sort of like it all comes back to the intention of the individual or the collective that creates a much more likely probability of a result in his terminology. For me personally, it's like I can sink into this frequency and obtain a result, whether it's manifestation, magic, healing, instantaneously, because the present moment is the only thing that we need to be concerned with, or that is going to bear a shift of consciousness is right now. And so then it's like, okay, prime that palpability where we're at, that insert of the sound accessing the brainwave that then you can register and recall and go, I did this yesterday, now I'm going to do it again, I'm going to do it tomorrow. And like Karen had mentioned, I use it use it as a battle tested. You want to be able to battle test and apply this mastery at will. So I always tell people, once you've had an experience, you need to go out, and I use a specific type of exercise that is able to replicate and recall their experience so they can access that state. And, go into an environment that you are not sitting in the lotus position, burning 3 incense, calling in your spirits, or whatever it is that you're doing, but you're able to attain it as if you're in Costco. Someone grabbed your shopping cart and said, nudge off, get out of my way. I'm late for my job. I've got to grab some groceries. And you're like, excuse me, you just grabbed my shopping cart from in front of me, and now I'm going to react with this emotion. Now you're going to shift it. Now you're going to change it. Now you're going to alter it. And that's exactly what Karen was speaking of. And that really excites me when you share that that realization, the observation, your ability to apply it, because that's really where people get lost. You know, Calm, Headspace, a lot of these sort of apps are really cool, but people cannot maintain that frequency. It's an hour of their day, and they feel like they're really able to unwind, relax, change a state, and then they go back to their real world problems as their perception, and you know, all bets are off. You know, I'm feeding the anxiety, the fear, the disappointment, whatever it is. And so now that you are using these sort of techniques, sort of culmination between the two, what is a normal outcome? What do you normally teach people to acquire from your training?
Well, honestly, it just depends. What we teach is, what do you want to do with your life? How do you find, you know, what are your personal goals? We meet people where they are. Everyone is somewhere different. Some people, they're just trying to get a good night's sleep. Some people are trying to, you know, get off long-term use of pharmaceuticals. We have an addiction doctor down in Florida, Dr. Mark Leeds, and he has medications that can help people with all the withdrawal symptoms off opioids, for example. But he can't give them other medications if they're having trouble sleeping or if they're feeling a little anxious. So he prescribes our recordings. Our recordings were used in a pilot study in New York City in a psychiatric practice, Dr. Anna Yusum. She found that after 2 weeks of listening to a particular set of recordings, and the people had a lot of flexibility on when they listened, how long they listened. You know, we made it simple for them to work into their daily lives. And there was a 26% reduction in anxiety after 2 weeks of listening. Whereas people that were in regular therapy, they saw just a 7% reduction in anxiety. So that was a very large increase in results. Some people in that study, one was a medical student, so she found she could sleep better. Thus, she was better rested for studying and taking her exams. She was less anxious. Another guy had an interesting result that wasn't really measured on the anxiety form, but he had been in a toxic relationship for years, and he was able to end that relationship suddenly. Somehow he became more whole, as we say, and found that, you know, that wasn't a vibration he wanted to be involved with anymore. I found that out myself doing certain things. You know, I would return from a spiritual retreat. This happened once. I returned from a spiritual retreat one weekend. I felt different with my then partner. When we interacted, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. And I ended that relationship. It needed to be ended. And that gave me the inkling to do it. But some people are interested in, you know, inducing lucid dreams, having out-of-body experiences. So, and then there's everything in between where they want to have better relationships, you know, increase their ability to be innovative and creative. All of those things are possible. So it's not really a way of teaching one basic thing to everyone, unless it's just learning how to get quiet inside to manage your thoughts and emotions so that you can achieve then all of those numerous goals that I just rattled off.
And this is definitely really a tool for growth for all souls. And we like to meet people where they are. And I think if you look at sacredacoustics.com, evaluate the website, you'll find that she has directions for a lot of different ways people can go, and very specific tools offered on that website to help do that.
And it's based on your level of experience. So a total beginner to meditation or binaural beats at all, any of this, is going to start somewhere different than someone who's already, you know, been a long time meditator or is experienced with binaural beats. We call those enthusiasts, who just want to try more techniques for things they may already know how to do, but they're just looking for more. And so there's a very wide range of approaches. And so we tailor them to the individual.
Wow. And so what are your guys' overview, realizing that you're moving in, as Eben would say, a primordial awareness? What do you think of the idea of because this is so interesting, that it's such an interesting viewpoint, because I get people that understand the mechanisms of a science-based reality as opposed to something that's more organic that you experience, but they come to the same consensus. We have no idea what consciousness is other than your experience. What are your thoughts on this karmic model of understanding, or how people apply it? Because I always share with people, your truth is the only truth you need to be concerned with. And then moreover, karma is predicated on your perception of reality, i.e. duality. And then, you know, people are like, oh, no, that's the law of the universe. And I'm okay with the law of the universe if I'm following a hermetic sort of like processes, which is in no direct correlation with anything that Taoism has taught in over 10,000 years. So you get this sort of like, this is my team. No, it's my team. Well, what's the realization? Well, do we want to die now and find out? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think those who have gone through the process, or at least a partial process of death, and come back to tell us about it, talk about a life review. And it's interesting. There's another hypnotherapist, Michael Newton, who would hypnotize people to between their lifetimes. So not past lives, but after you die and then you're getting ready to come into, say, this lifetime. What are you doing? And what they've learned is that that life review is very key. And when you experience that life review, interestingly, in most cultures, not all cultures, you're experiencing events in your life from the viewpoint of the other person involved. So if you were maybe the cause of some pain and suffering, you're going to feel that pain and suffering from the other side. Now, what this seems to cause is someone wanting to make themselves better, to have another chance to learn that lesson, to not behave that way again. And so when they go into, what am I going to do the next time? They're helping to plan what those events might be and what those challenges in that lifetime might be. So to me, that's karma, is that anything that you've handed out, you're going to realize at some point, in a setting of pure unconditional love, mind you, you're going to realize, oh my gosh, I did something wrong. I need to make amends for that. And so to us, the idea of karma is self-directed. It's not just a mechanical law of the universe, but it is something that you are willfully involved in helping to achieve. And so if it's the case that all of us, need to learn this lesson of love, a lot of times we learn that lesson by the lack of love, and we actually want to have that experience. That's what's so shocking to people, is that no, you actually planned that because you wanted to know what that actually felt like. You didn't want to just read about it or hear a story from someone else. You wanted to have that experience. And so that's what karma is for us. And we say that the golden rule is really written into the fabric of the universe through this mechanism. Treat others as you would like to be treated, because one day you're going to feel like what it was like to be treated the way you behaved. And many people will ask, well, how do we know this is what really happens when we die? Because these people didn't really die. And so we have the work of Dr. Christopher Kerr in a hospice center in Buffalo, where he scientifically set up a study and talked to all the patients who were in the process of dying. And lo and behold, one of the things that most of these patients are going through is the beginnings of a life review. They actually go back, they have these very enlivened, more real than real dreams and visions, and they involve themes from their early life. They start to make amends, they start to feel that love, and they enter into the afterlife surrounded by that love most often, but after they've addressed some of their lifetime. So I can only assume that when people have a near-death experience, they've not had a long sort of gradual death like in a hospice setting, but it's happened very suddenly. So the natural process just gets put into, a much shorter time period. And so that life review, I think, needs to be taken seriously as some evidence of how this concept of karma really works.
The other important point I would make about the life review, and this comes from Dr. Bruce Grayson, who's been a skeptical medical scientist studying near-death experiences for more than 45 years. But in a publication back in September of 2021, he pointed out that about half of life reviews involve a reliving of events, not just remembering of events. And that's a very important thing. Having been to that realm, the kind of shocking nature of that ultra reality, when you're in a world where you can experience birth, death, everything in between simultaneously from your physical life here on Earth, that is showing you a very profound kind of ability of observation and of arrangement and of information integration and assimilation that's available from that spiritual perspective that is not commonly available to us in this kind of ego body form. Although certainly it's achievable in deep meditation, centering prayer, the many ways we have of going within. People can come to recognize that kind of profound sense of that integrative information field of the universe. But again, it's all about kind of karma. It's about soul growth. It's about the evolution of all consciousness that we're all participating in.
And interestingly, the one group that doesn't seem to have a life review during a near-death experience are indigenous cultures, tribal cultures. So that has to make me wonder, are those folks living just in a different way where they're always in the moment? They don't have anything to process because it's already been processed. So that's something also interesting to ponder.
I would also surmise that those some of those indigenous cultures are much more akin to kind of a nonverbal form of telepathic communication with each other. And if that is truly the case, then they could go through life without ever really needing a life review because they'd be in such harmony with their fellow tribe members in terms of kind of understanding their purpose for existence on a day-to-day basis and what they're doing. And so you would never have the kind of conflicts that in our society might lead to the necessity for a life review to review the way that we handled various situations that we might have handled better.
I have no idea how that might relate to Taoism, the deep.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm about to give you a big answer to that because I've transitioned probably dozens, probably 50 or more people over my career as a priest over 32 years. And the two Taoist lineages that I operate in, one I'm a 66th generation holder, the other one I'm a 126th generation holder. All it is giving me a lens of understanding. It's not about getting on a soapbox and peddling a religious belief system, even though Taoism goes in both sort of sections of philosophy versus religion. But religion within Taoism is more this idea that everything has an element or a facet of the diamond of consciousness would be transmuted into a godlike form that's just a source of information. So a lot of people are like, you've got a God for everything. I mean, yeah, it's just information. It's just like, oh my goodness, I've got a group of friends. There's hundreds of them that I could just access and ask for your insight on this, that, or something else. And so with the transition, I've delved very deeply into the realms beyond this one, studying and teaching the mastery of leaving the physical body per se internally. And there's this fundamental understanding within Taoism between the breath in and the breath out is what we call the stillness, the Wu Ji. And that's the access to the mother of all things, the Tao. And so you can replicate whatever frequency you're at, just like the charge that we're all experiencing right now going, whoa, this is kind of exciting. This charge that you get to realize that this is all registered and validated as your perception. So as I would concur with Eben's realization that perhaps maybe, the journey of someone within our culture is not as simplistic in the understanding, the viewpoint of the experience. But normally what I do is give people 9 live readings leading up to the one they're in right now so they can experience the very essence of every single one from birth to death. And so you hook them up. I do it energetically, and they visually experience it in their third eye, and they feel everything that they experience through that lifetime. And that sort of takes them to that point where they are today that gives them an understanding of who they are if you believe in a reincarnation. And this is why I always preface this on what is your belief system? Because I see this on a daily basis where people come to me, I've got cancer. Someone's telling me I'm going to die. And I've got another person with the same situation. And both of them tell me I'm going to beat this. 6 months later, one person's dead, the other person is not. And it comes down to the seed of, what do you truly believe? What are you telling yourself what you want to believe, or are you telling yourself the truth? And that absolute truth is only on you and your perception. Everyone's like, there's an absolute truth. Sure, absolutely. Your truth is the absolute truth. And the validation of that, sort of the peppering of sort of a dualistic sort of duality, and understanding there's a good, bad, up, down, in and out. That's the seed of creation and how we perceive it. But to merge to being at one with all things bears the fruit of this conscious state that you can change anything that you want and alter that. I realized that 32 years ago, I started doing readings. And so one of the first things you learn is distant healing and all clairvoyance sort of senses. And so I read this one person, and basically I was told he's going to die in 2 months, 3 hours, and 4 minutes. I made the very fatal error through my own journey of telling him that. And he died 2 months, 3 hours, and 4 minutes later. And so I asked my teachers, being when I started channeling immediately, it was sort of a progression channeling, instantly accessed. Lao-Tzu was my teacher, still to this day. And it's a transmutation of a facet of consciousness. And I can see him physically as Lao-Tzu, or he could be nothing more than light itself, but it's information moreover. And then I asked him, well, was there a reason for that? Well, you need to understand there's a greater understanding of you can alter anything at will. There is nothing set in stone as long as you have the ability to realize that you're the master, keeper, creator of your reality. I was like, whoa. So can I change that? He goes, absolutely. You do not have to be set in stone for what is perceived as the end result or someone telling you. And that's why I'm very, very reserved when it comes to reading. I'll give people the baseline, but there are things that can be altered instantaneously once they awaken this universal awareness, and then they can generate anything and everything they want. I always tell people, like, well, why did God let megalomaniacs like Adolf Hitler and Mao exist, and all this death and destruction, rapists, murderers? Understand this. Their existence is part of their belief system. The reason that these people fall from their high states of wherever they're at their peak of death and destruction is only because they realize that they're not believing their rhetoric anymore, and they come back to this perception of what they perceive as their reality, which is, oh, karma's going to come and get me. Because I always remind people, you can walk under a ladder, and if you believe it's going to give you good luck, it will give you good luck. Or if you believe it's going to give you bad luck, it will give you bad luck. And so the soul review is an interesting understanding, because when you step out past this, and I've literally been concierge service for many people, and one example comes to mind where this woman came to me, and her brother was on death's door. He was in a coma, and the father was across the other side of the world, and he wanted to see the son. And so I went to the hospital. I taught herself and the nurses and doctors how to regulate the vitals, and they were like stunned. It's like, how all of a sudden is there a regulated sort of vital coming from this guy? He should be dead already. And I communicated with him instantaneously. He said, I'm going to hang out here. I want to see what the outcome is when my father walks in the door. Now, 2 weeks, we maintained his vitals. And the second the father walked in, gave the son a hug, gone. Now, when you go out past that from a Taoist perspective, there's this pulsating, nothing but phosphorus white light. And then you go into complete darkness. And between those two is what we talk about as the Wu Ji, where you can off-sprout into any limitless possibilities of how you want to explore or generate another re-up in your reality. But that's the simplicity of a Taoist perspective of what is past this veil that we perceive as our 3D reality, and it's endless. Now we could go deeper and deeper into it, but it's just funny how, and what I kind of coin this as being a sort of situation where you get a group consensus, you can get a literally almost like a mob sort of mentality where people want more of the same, so they generate more of the same. I always remind people the universe doesn't have a moral compass. It's listing. You want it, you'll get it. So if you generate this experience, oh, this is what I had, but little do they know the variables of that experience was predicated on a past life or the 6 degrees of separation that they were able to transmute that into their experience from being a degree of someone else, somewhere else. There's so many variables because once you get out to that energetic flow of the universe and we're all entangled, things are instant. Things are just there is no delay. There's sort of like a you think it and it's realized, and that's kind of like how I sort of help people understand their own power, is that once you obtain that frequency, all bets are off as to what you could create in your reality. And so that framework of the soul review is not within the tapestry of Taoist practice. But I mean, that's also, 10,000-year-old indigenous stuff. And I get that. And guess what I always say? Guess what? There's a million ways up the mountain. There is no right or wrong. And so I never, ever always base it on this. If you dismiss someone else's belief system, you dismiss your own, which is just a base out, realization that you come to as you start to discover more and more of these things. And so, wherever you are in your journey within this reincarnation, as you accept it as such, you will replicate whatever it is that you want to experience from the larger consciousness system that Tom would say, giving you exactly what you want. And so within out-of-body experiences, that's an example. It's like, you get the guy, I get a lot of students, I want to be the badass exorcist. I want to struggle with the spirits and the demons and the entities. And, that's a very fundamental processes within Taoism. But I also get people to understand you are creating your reality. If you are bringing these energies in, they're simulated by your perception of reality. And people are like, what? Listen, if you believe in the boogeyman, it will be materialized and there will be a palpability of that in energy, frequency, vibration. So it's just so exciting to hear you guys speak on this stuff. And when we talk on it, we have this amplified sort of like resonating sort of flow of energy that the three of us are experiencing right now, which is like this charge up your spine. And it's like, oh, this is sort of exciting. We're resonating with each other. Yeah. And it's just part of that oneness that we talk about. And when you guys say that, it's just a beautiful validation to the audience and to other people that there is no right or wrong way up the mountain. It's wherever you're meant to be. The consciousness will give it to you. And it's just validating. The sound is the ticket, in my opinion. And everything that you guys have done within your body of work and understanding this incredible topic of consciousness is kind of like evident in what you offer to the universe. So I would ask you, where are we at? We're at, oh my goodness. Where you fell into the void of time and space. I warned you about that, but I've just had nothing but an incredible amount of joy coming from sharing space with you guys today. Wow. I would say in closing, I would ask you, what is your definition of consciousness?
You start.
I would simply say consciousness is the awareness of existence, what it is like to be something. And that self-awareness, I believe, is a shared property. I believe the entire universe is self-aware, and sentient beings share that level of information assimilation and integration. And that's where meditation, centering prayer can be very important. But ultimately, it's what we do in these lives, living in these bodies, how we interact with our fellow beings and treat ourselves. That's the ultimate measure of any kind of enlightenment we might be achieving. And the world is going that direction towards enlightenment. The scientific community is absolutely shifting over quantum physics, neuroscience, philosophy of mind, non-local consciousness, and parapsychology, all the topics we cover in Living in a Mindful Universe. Every bit of that is part of this awakening of humanity that's been thousands of years in the making.
And I would just add that that awakening is due to each and every one of us. You alluded to the diamond. We talk about each of us represent a facet on that diamond of oneness. And it's our job to kind of keep our facet shiny. And because that's our contribution to that one consciousness we're all a part of. And so I would just thank anyone. Please accept my gratitude for taking the time to go within, to making that a goal in your life, to know who you are behind your thoughts and emotions, to identify that observer within. That's how we get to the meaning of consciousness, not by talking about it, but by just diving in and experiencing it for ourselves. So that's what I would express is gratitude to both you, San, and all of your listeners for all that you do to bring this to the world in an active, dynamic way.
And I mean, that's really that collective. And by the fact that the three of us come together, the community comes together, the understanding, just talking about consciousness now as something that's palpable, that can be sort of correlated to an experience, has changed the world as we know it, in my opinion, and it's sort of raised it up. You know, a lot of people, when I do channeling of Lao Tzu, they're like, well, I've got this question, that question. And it's always like, what's happening with 2024? What's going on? Is it the apocalypse, the end of it? And literally verbatim what he said the last time I channeled him directly, which I talked to him all day long, but I channeled him, and he's like, basically, a human is like a grain of sand asking the beach what's going on today. Now, when you understand that and you recognize you are the beach, now that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Well, that primordial mind.
And you're contributing to what's going on. So you better get your inner world together so that we can get this outer world back into some fashion that we all admire.
Right. And that's the beautiful part. I love that. And again, I want to thank the universe for bringing you guys into my life. And what an incredible expression of just an amazing beings. And I'm very grateful that I have new friends. And so
very good.
With that, I would like to, in closing, I would like to ask you guys, what are you offering to the universe today? What are you offering to my audience? What's going on with you guys today?
Well, you can go to sacredacoustics.com and get a free 20-minute Om recording that will give you an idea of what we've been talking about. And you can find out for yourself how our binaural beats might be helpful to you. The recordings that were used in that pilot study to reduce anxiety, look for those. They're called the Whole Mind Bundle, and they were drastically reduced during COVID, including a free option. So finances are not an issue here. Go get those recordings and give it a try.
And, I would simply add that this is really the beginning of the rest of your life for each and every one of you. And I hope that some of what we've shared today has offered a glimpse into how you might live that life much more fully and follow the pathway of your higher soul. People can stay in touch with me through ebenalexander.com. I also would highly recommend offerings at innersanctumcenter.com, INNER sanctumcenter.com. That was really Karen's brilliance putting that together. There's several offerings there. There's a mental health practitioner course we did with Dr. Anna Yusum. There's also 2 years worth of every 2 weeks interviews we did during the pandemic with thought leaders around the world on consciousness. And then also there's a monthly webinar that we do with people who are very engaged with our work, and you can join up there. All that's at innersanctumcenter.com.
Well, again, thank you guys so much. And the audience, thank you for sharing your time with us today, and go and check out Karen and Eben's offerings. And I am your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master Sun Qing, and I'll see you on the next one, guys.